welcome to Three Count Commentaries. This is your host, MongoSlade. So, the documentary on Bret Hart was fantastic. It was tremendous. It was truly, and I do believe it, it was the best one. The Bret Hart, because they didn't linger too much on negative things, even though they did mention them, but they didn't linger. And it was about the Hart family, because that's always been everything that was about the Harts. It was about their family. And they didn't separate Bret too much. I mean, obviously they talked a lot about Bret personally, but they did a great job of folding the story of the entire Hart family and how the entire Hart family is tied up with the WWE. Now, in preparation for this, I started doing research damn near 2 months ago because I had to read 2 books. So I read Bret's book, and I actually read Passion and Pain, or Pain and Passion, the author of which is actually in the biography. So that was really cool. They leaned on him heavily to discuss the Stu Hart biography. Bret Hart is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. You know, you ask me on a good day if he's the greatest, I'll probably say yes. Bret Hart is tremendous. I love Bret Hart. So I want to talk about this. I'm not going to bore everybody with like the details of the book and all in the books and all that kind of stuff. But I will use the books as a guide to sort of flesh out things they didn't go into. So let's go into the biography. So they talked about Bret drawing cartoons, that he loves to draw. And it's ironic because, you know, he had a feud with Jerry Lawler, and Jerry Lawler also loves to draw. So, you know, they never really made a big deal in wrestling, period, out of Bret being a really good artist. His artistic skills, as far as the fans knowing it, started coming out later in his career when he started drawing like mocking cartoons of like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and stuff. But he talked a lot about it in his book about, you know, drawing pictures in the 80s of guys. And he had a lot of that stuff in the biography. He kept those pictures, which made them really cool. You know, like those got to be priceless. Like Bret drawings from the 80s, those have to be like priceless pieces of him and Andre, or, you know, pictures that he drew of Andre, or pictures he drew of the Ultimate Warrior. Like they had a really funny one of the Ultimate Warrior in that biography. So that was tremendous. I love that they started with that, you know, because it kind of set the standard that Bret is, you know, multi-talented. He's done a lot of different things. So they talked a lot about Stu being born in Saskatchewan. I think they say he was born in 1915 or something like that. And him learning to wrestle in the YMCA, and where he met Toots Mondt in New York. Toots Mondt, for people who don't know, is one of the guys. Well, the guy actually that got Vince McMahon Sr. into New York, because Vince McMahon Sr. used to run Capital Wrestling out of Washington, D.C., and his TV creeped up to New York, where Toots Mondt was the promoter. And the two of them kind of combined and, you know, with the help of some other guys, created the WWWF. So the McMahons and the Harts, you know, that they always have that extra branch too. Kind of how like Vince always has a soft spot for the Colognes, or because of Gorilla Monsoon, because Gorilla Monsoon used to help run Puerto Rico. It's kind of the same way with the Harts. You know, Toots Mondt used to helped Stu, you know, get his footing. So these sort of, the rivers run deep, you know. And even though he ended up, I think Toots Mondt, he died before Vince bought the company or something? Or was he still alive? I don't remember. But, you know, he was one of the original WWWF founders. But they talked about, you know, them two meeting Helen, or, Stu meeting Helen, rather. And him buying the Calgary territory for $5,000. The Calgary territory, they didn't go into it, but Stampede, of course, wasn't the first name of the Calgary territory. It had several different names, and it actually went defunct and started back up several times. But the Stampede wrestling that they showed clips of was the longest running version of Stampede wrestling. It was first called Klondike Wrestling, and it was founded in 1948. Before it was Stampede, it was Klondike Wrestling, and then it changed the name from Klondike Wrestling then it was changed to Big Time Wrestling some years later. So, you know, the Stampede was after Big Time went defunct. Then it went a couple of years, and then they started Stampede. So they talked about it in the biography that Helen Hart was the business manager. She handled all the checks, the incoming calls, outgoing calls. She didn't book any talent, but she was the one that if you needed money or if you needed to be paid, you had to go through Helen. Stu didn't really handle the money. Helen handled the money. But they shared an office. I think they showed like a home video of Stu and Helen sharing an office. Even though I think Helen had her own desk. But it was truly a family business. For a long time, all of the Harts worked in some way with the company. Bruce, the second oldest, I believe. I can never remember who's the oldest and who. Like I know who the youngest is, but there's 12 of them. I can never remember. But Bruce, one of the older boys, was actually the booker and was running the territory, and he was. We'll talk more about Bruce later because he becomes important. The Bruce Hart becomes very important. I'm surprised he wasn't in this biography, but he becomes pretty important. But they talked about Stampede, and Bruce was the booker of Stampede. He's the one who found the Dynamite Kid over in England and brought him over. And it was the Dynamite Kid that really kind of changed the style of Stampede. It made it more popular than it really was before. Like everything I read on Stampede pretty much says that the Dynamite Kid coming to is what made the territory. He brought a completely different style. So Bruce was doing good, at least for a little while. Meanwhile, they talked about Bret, Bret wrestling in high school. We also got to talk a lot more about what Bret was kind of like as a teenager. Like he looked a lot like Michael Cera. Like if you ever seen Michael Cera from like Super Bad or Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That's how Bret Hart looked as a teenager. It was pretty crazy. They talked about him going to film school, Bret, and making the movie The Lizard, which is very interesting considering they also talked about Mick Foley's film, his homemade film that he made a couple last week. So these guys really are very interesting. So Bret, tried different things in life and then just started wrestling in like 1978. They didn't mention his trainers, and they probably should have. He wasn't actually trained by Stu Hart, even though he did do some training with Stu. He was trained by two Japanese wrestlers, one named Mr. Hito and the other named Mr. Sakuraba. And they actually trained him in pro wrestling. They trained Bret Hart. Of course, Bret wrestles for Stampede for several years before the infamous buyout. Now, the buyout was something that was kind of touched on in the biography, but most people, when they talk about the buyout, they want to tell the whole story. So what happens is Helen wanted to get out of the wrestling business. Stu and Helen were pretty old at this point. And they were holding on to the business because Bruce wanted the company. So he didn't have the money to fund it, of course. He just wanted his parents to continue to fund it. He just wanted to run it. So Bruce was the booker, and he was a mama's boy. At least from every story that I've read, Bruce was a mama's boy. And they didn't want to take the Stampede away from Bruce. So, but Helen was done with the company, and Stu did not like what Bruce had been doing. Didn't like his booking style. It was too flashy, too many small guys and stuff like that. And plus, the territory wasn't making any money. Calgary was pretty much dead. So Vince had already bought out the Tunnies in Toronto, I believe. And now he's coming to Western Canada. And so he makes this deal with Stu where he would take on these four guys, Bret, Bulldog, Davey, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. And he would give Stu somewhere between, I think, $100,000 a year for 10 years. So $1 million. Stu would get $1 million, $100,000 a year for 10 years, plus a percentage of the gates in Vancouver and Calgary. So if they ran a show in Calgary, they ran a show in Vancouver, he would get $100,000 a year plus a piece of those gates. And he would hire Bret, Jim, Bulldog, and Dynamite. He would also have to bring in Bruce, and Bruce would get a front office position. So Vince takes in the four guys, and he brings in Bruce. He decides that Bruce thinks that he's going to be the booker of WWF or whatever for some reason. Bruce ends up being left to be the promoter of the WWF in Calgary, right? That's his job. But Bruce doesn't want the WWF in Calgary, so he doesn't do a very good job. And this is where the bone of contention comes from, because you have Bruce being the promoter, and in Eastern Canada, the WWF is doing fine. They're lighting up Maple Leaf Gardens and Toronto and all that kind of stuff. But then they come over to Western Canada and it's the shits. Bruce is like, hey, your style just doesn't work here. And everybody's kind of like, is Bruce really doing a good job, or is Bruce the shits at being a promoter? So they toggled that ball around for a while. And then eventually Vince is like, we can't make any money in Calgary. Fuck Calgary. And he reneges on the deal. So then there was some more stuff where Bruce was running opposition. He had a guy who was trying to fund a new Stampede Wrestling, and the WWF found out that Bruce was trying to get a promoter's license in Calgary, trying to run opposition, and Stu didn't know anything about it. And then it was the Stu and the Bruce thing, and then Bruce was, of course, being a shitty promoter, but they didn't fire him. It was just a lot of stuff going on, and Vince was just kind of like, fuck it, I'm done with this. And then the Bulldogs were being assholes because the Dynamite Kid's an asshole. So they was like, look, everything involving the Harts at this point was becoming the shits. Bret was not, didn't have a personality, but he kind of has to keep him around because he doesn't want to fire him. Jim, Jim wasn't even around yet. He wasn't around that much. He was going to like Mid-South and stuff like that. Davey was just doing whatever Dynamite told him to do. And Dynamite was like, we can make more money in Japan, so we're going to go back and forth to Japan. And at the time, the WWF had a deal with New Japan Pro Wrestling. The British Bulldogs then doubles-crossed New Japan and signed with All Japan, which fucked over Vince, and he was mad about that too. So you have to take all that stuff into account when Vince was like, fuck Calgary, I'm not paying Stu shit. It's Bruce being an asshole about being a promoter. It's about Bret, Vince not seeing any talent in Bret. And the Bulldogs, who were, guys who can make him some money. But Dynamite was pretty much leading the team and being a complete and total ass. But anyway, Vince ended up reneging on the deal, not wanting to give Stu anything. So that's how they ended up restarting Stampede Wrestling. And then, of course, once again, Bruce was in charge. So this was like the mid to late 80s. So it was a lot of stuff going on during that time. So also during this time, of course, Bret gets married to Julie. And I was interested that she was in the biography. So that was pretty cool. Her and Bret was married for several years. Bret talked about the cowboy Bret Hart thing. And it was the only idea they really had for him because he was really not doing anything for most of his WWF run. So then, as they mentioned in the biography, it was to get out of the cowboy gimmick. Bret said, hey, how about you make me and Jim the Anvil a tag team. And then the WWF was like, okay, we'll just add Jimmy Hart to that. And then they came up with the pink, and Vince loved the pink, and Jim Neidhart loved the pink. So therefore, the Hart Foundation was born. And I love that Bret said, like, we all loved each other. We all liked each other. That's how the Hart Foundation was able to work. And the Hart Foundation did a really good job of establishing tag team wrestling in the WWF, along with the British Bulldogs. Those matches were tremendous. If you're skittish about watching wrestling from the 80s, you can watch that stuff. For starters, Dynamite is ahead of his time. The guy might be a complete and total prick, but he was a phenomenal wrestler. He was. Dude was tremendous. He was a dick on forehead, though, for sure. But they kind of poo-pooed the Hart Foundation because there was so much to talk about in terms of Bret. They didn't spend a lot of time on the Hart Foundation. Then they talked about Bret going solo. Bret says, like, oh, this was due to the fan mail. And in his book, he talked about him having more fan mail than Hulk Hogan. I was like, that raised my eyebrows. I'm like, is Bret embellishing? But Bret was pretty honest about things in that book, so maybe he was telling the truth. In any event, he started talking about being a solo act, and basically he didn't have anything to say, didn't have anything to talk about, but he could always lean on his family. And so he leaned on bringing his family into it, how he was trained with his dad, and how all his brothers were into wrestling, And then Gorilla Monsoon actually helped put somebody over by, instead of burying guys, talking about the dungeon and how tough the Harts were. And that actually gave people the idea on TV that the Harts were like badasses. And it actually helped Bret. And in his book, Bret says that it was Gorilla Monsoon who actually put over the excellence of execution. He actually came up with that. So that was pretty cool. Not too many guys can say that Gorilla Monsoon actually put them over instead of was like burying them on commentary, which actually became a Gorilla Monsoon stereotype that he buried guys on commentary. But Bret was talking about winning the Intercontinental title, and he was talking about being essentially the work rate title, the title for the best technical wrestler, and how he felt like it was an honor for his family. And he didn't think he would ever get this far because Bret had become so burnt out and cynical over the WWF. He signed there in like 1984, and he didn't actually start doing anything until like 87 or 88. So I mean, even Bret. And Bret was in his 30s at this point. Bret is like 33 or something like that when he won the Intercontinental title. 34 almost. So he's not like a spring chicken or anything. So, but he's like in the smack dab middle of his prime. So they kind of smoothed over a lot of his Intercontinental title run, but they did spend some time on Davey, the British Bulldog, the first, what I call the first Hart Civil War. They did a really good job here of showing the clips of Diana and Helen and Bruce building up the match. And Bret kind of took offense to Bruce, some of his words in the book. He was kind of like, they told Bruce to be on Davey Boy's side, but when he started talking about my ego, it kind of felt real. And like I said before, the Pain and Passion book, man, one of the regular things that's a running thread is Bret plus ego. He's a pretty cocky guy. But they did a really good job of showing, how this was tearing the family apart, and they don't really want them to fight and all that kind of stuff, which adds so much to this match. And you can watch this match without knowing that stuff, and it still means a lot. The Bruce stuff will become important later too. So, of course, it's, him winning the Intercontinental title. He talked about that building him for the World Championship. He did not bury Ric Flair, so I'm glad he's on good terms with Ric Flair. And he basically just said that he wanted to tell the truth after he won the title about how it meant to him and what it meant to him and stuff like that. Then Vince, gives Bret a huge compliment by saying that Bret brought a great credibility to the title, and that, the credibility factor was at its highest when Bret was the champion. And I think that that's a tremendous compliment. I'm not sure if he's blowing smoke up his ass or not, but it's a tremendous compliment. I mean, that's the same belt Kurt Angle had. As much as I love Bret Hart, he ain't an Olympian. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, but he was certainly, he also wasn't Bob Backlund. Bob Backlund was legit. Iron Sheik was also legit. He was the shits by the time he won the title, but the Iron Sheik was pretty legit. But I'm guessing as far as being able to have believable matches and a believable style and not be a superhuman cartoon character, then yeah, I guess Bret would be the most believable guy at the time. He showed a lot of clips of Bret talking to kids and, him standing awkwardly around his limo as kids talk to him. I want to be just like you, Bret. Oh man, if I had met Bret Hart in like 1994 or 1995, I probably would have sounded the same way, if we're being honest. Then of course they went into the feud with Owen. Now this is why the Bruce stuff was so important before, because it was Bruce's idea to do the Hart the infighting storyline. He had pitched the idea where he would feud with Bret leading to a match at WrestleMania 10 or something like that, and this was him trying to get back in the good graces of the WWF after he did all the bullshit he did before. So he came up with this idea. They were already bringing the Harts in to do the match with what was supposed to be Jerry Lawler and the Knights, and it ended up being Shawn Michaels because Jerry Lawler got in trouble for kitty diddling, and which who knows whether he did it or not. He didn't go to jail, so I can't tell you. But Bruce was trying to put the match together, and Bret was like, oh, Bruce is building everything around him because he got this idea in his head that I'm going to work with him from Survivor Series forward. So it was basically Bruce planting the seed before to feud with Bret later. And then they just replaced Bruce with Owen. And, that was, Bret said it was his idea. There were some other people who said it was Vince's idea, or some people said it was Pat Patterson's idea. But however it went, Bruce pitched the idea to feud with Bret, to do a brother versus brother storyline. It was supposed to be him. And then through the magic of backstage chicanery, he was taken out and Owen was put in. So, I think we're all better off for it. I hate that they didn't spend more time on the Bret and Owen storyline, but they did tell the crux of it for the most part. The initial, they didn't talk about the initial part. What started it. Outside of just Owen being jealous, but the start of it is just as important as the entire storyline. And then they kind of skipped the cage match, which is the important part because they had all the Harts out there. Davey is out there and Jim the Anvil is out there. And, that was tremendous. But they skipped all of that to go to Owen costing Bret the title. And then that was just kind of it. They just kind of stopped going from there. I was like, no, you could spend more time on Owen. But, of course, they talked about Owen's death and how it ripped the family up. And, how, he believes that it kind of sapped the life force from his parents. And that, losing a son and going through they didn't mention it, but they probably should have, that the lengthy lawsuit is probably what tired the parents out. They were constantly going back and forth. Now the book, the Passion and Pain book, Pain and Passion, however it goes, whatever, go into some detail about it. That essentially the family was split in half. That there was a settle half of the family, and then there was a let's go to trial half of the family. And that Stu and Helen basically just wanted this thing to be over. They didn't, Owen is dead. Nobody knows what the hell is going to happen from this point forward. They don't really care about the money. They know it was an accident. They didn't really blame Vince, but it's like he's got to cough up some money. But then Martha's camp is like just juice them for everything that they've got. She wants like $33 million or something, some nonsense like that. Vince offered some money. I don't remember how much, but then the lawyers and stuff like that, Martha's lawyers, because the lawyers work for Martha, not for the Hart family. There was a lot of, I don't want to go through that stuff again. I went through some of that stuff in the Owen Hart Dark Side of the Ring thing. So if you want to go through the Owen Hart Dark Side of the Ring to get more of the details on that, please do. Just know that the family was split in half. And that Owen and that Stu and Martha just wanted this thing to end. And they wanted to move on. And then there were some of the women who were on the just settle side of the family. They were accused of, well, you just want your husband to get a job. Ellie, the mother of Natalia, she was one of those. She wanted it to end because she's one of the older kids. And she's like, look, this is really ripping our family apart. And they're like, oh, you just want your husband to get a job. And then Diana was another one. Of course, her husband had already gone back to the WWF at this time, and they hated Diana for that. And there was just a lot of stuff going on. And Bret was on Martha's side during this whole ordeal. So he was on the Martha side. I think Bruce was on the Martha side. And so that's probably why they weren't in the documentary. But Martha ended up turning heel on all of them after the fact anyway, so it didn't matter. But ultimately, it sapped the strength out of Stu and Helen. They started to, and they was already old people, man. And of course, Helen dies not too long after Owen passed, and then Stu dies not too long after Helen. But that's when the documentary started to get dark, because they had already built up the family, and now the family is gone. The support system is gone. But of course, that's after. They talked about Montreal, and I don't want to go through Montreal and all that shit all over again. I mean, why would I? Why would I want to go through Montreal all over again? I mean, it hasn't been the most debated fucking subject in the wrestling business for the last 20 fucking years. I'm sick of fucking talking about Montreal personally. So I would rather talk about anything else. So if you're looking for me to talk about Montreal, I'm not going to do it. I don't care. Okay, it's over. I saw the shit happen. I thought it was crazy. I thought it was funny. Then I thought, I was like, damn, that's fucked up. Then I was like, oh man, Bret's a shithead. I'm like, oh, well, Shawn's a shithead. No, Vince is a shithead. How about all of them are shitheads and they do what shitheads do, which is just fuck each other over. So it was all bad. I don't want to talk about Montreal. But I do want to talk about Bret's retirement. This was, of course, gave Bret an opportunity to bury somebody because that's what Bret does. He chose his target wisely. It was Bill fucking Goldberg. And he said Bill Goldberg kicked him in the head hard enough to loosen bricks out of a wall. And then says that out of a 1 to 10, he's a 0 when it comes to wrestling. And that the concussion ended his career and likely led to his stroke later. Now, usually that's what Bret does. He kind of links the concussion with his stroke. But this time he talked about, he was riding a bike and he fell off the bike. And that probably was what caused his stroke. And that he had to learn to walk and talk all over again. He had to, he was in a wheelchair. And even though he had spent most of his adult life on the road, not really doing too much of a good job raising his kids and cheating on his wife quite a bit, which he goes into like a lot of detail on the book about, basically him banging rats all the time, which of course, his female fan base, people say like, oh, Bret had such a huge female fan base. Like I bet I know why. He's probably out here getting good dick reports. Anyway, so Bret decides to, after his stroke and his near-death experience, he decides to, go out and make amends with the WWF. Now, they skipped his Hall of Fame announcement because, he didn't go to WrestleMania that year. But he was actually inducted in the Hall of Fame long before 2010. So, but 2010 is when he came in to, do the big segment with Shawn, the big face-to-face where they shook hands. And they did the hug, but obviously you could look at Bret's face and he was not... He probably thought the handshake was sincere, but the hug was probably a bit much. And, they talked about being friends. And that's the important thing that I think a lot of people need to recognize, that they were friends for a long time, the Bret and Shawn, because they had the same idea. They were smaller guys who were stuck behind what they call the dinosaurs. If you've ever seen the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, I think they did like a face-to-face thing with Jim Ross. They talked about that. That's pretty much the thing that they bonded over, is that they were both in the shadow of like Hogan and Warrior and all this. And the only guy who really wanted to work with them was Macho Man. But Vince didn't want Macho Man to work with him. Like he worked with Bret, I think, on some house shows, and he did some European stuff with Shawn. But Savage was really the only one of the Trinity that was willing to work with them and put them over. Warrior was a shithead and getting fired all the time, and Hogan was kind of like, that didn't work for me, brother. And actually balked at the idea of losing to Bret at SummerSlam 93. Was it 93? Yeah. He's supposed to carry the belt to SummerSlam 93. And then Hogan finagled his way to dropping the belt at King of the Ring 93. Dropped him back to Yokozuna. So they had that problem where, they had these super mega stars that usually they would, the tree that's planted, it grows, it bears fruit, and then the fruit has seeds in it, and then they plant the seed. Except for, these guys were selfish, with the exception of Savage. These guys were selfish, Warrior and Hogan and all those guys, even Roddy Piper to a degree. Roddy Piper had did a job for Bret, so he kind of gets out of this conversation via doing a job for Bret. But Piper was just as selfish as Hogan. He didn't like doing jobs, and he avoided doing jobs whenever he could. But so there was nobody really from the '80s for them guys to work with to get over. That's why they brought back Bob Backlund. So that's really what they bonded over. But then they became direct competitors later, and things were not so much because there was only one champion. It's not like you can move Shawn Michaels to SmackDown and not have to deal with them. There was one champion, so there's going to be some trouble, and it was a lot of trouble. Now, they did mention the Sunny Days comment, which I'm surprised. I am so surprised they bothered to even mention that. But Bret, who had already been caught cheating numerous times, according to the book, the Sunny Days comment was kind of like that's it, like enough of this shit. He had already been busted cheating a couple of times and was barely, his marriage was barely hanging on by a thread. I like how in the biography, Shawn was like, there was a young lady named Sunny on the roster at the time, and she and I were running around. Or running around. That's what he said. Oh God, she and I was running around, and then she became friends with Bret. I was like, oh my God. Um, if you look, I did not read all of Tammy's book. I just read the part where she talked about Shawn Michaels. It's not good, man. I don't know. I don't know if you're taking that broad to Jamaica. It's like running around, but there was this belief that Tammy was basically fucking everybody. And some people said, oh, she fucked Ahmed Johnson, and she fucked Bulldog, and of course she fucked Bret. But who knows? Bret said it didn't happen. Tammy said it didn't happen. But Shawn saying it on TV is what led to the big fight with them pulling each other's hair out. And Shawn tried to make it like, oh, it was just him and I going, rah, rah. And Bret was very like, I threw a left hook, boom, hit Shawn right in the right cheek, or like detailing the fight. And Shawn is kind of like, oh, it was kind of like they were two girls scratching at each other in high school. And Bret was just down there like, I knocked him the fuck out and all that shit. But that I thought that was funny. But the rivalry between the two of them is excellent stuff, man. Like when the heat is real, it comes through the TV. And that's one of the many things why wrestling can never be the same again, is because we know everybody's working. There is no concept that, I legitimately don't like this guy, and so I'm going to go out there and make him like an ass. Or I'm going to work with him. We're going to work snug because, I don't like this guy. But of course, they talked about Stone Cold Steve Austin and WrestleMania 13 and the infamous heel turn, the double turn, and all that stuff. It was just such a really tight and heartfelt biography that focused on Bret Hart as an athlete and as an artist and as a man and, a family man at that. Despite the fact that he had his faults as a family man, the Hart family was really what this biography was about. And, Diana was in it, Ross was in it, Allison was in it. So it was really good. I really enjoyed this thing, man. And to me, this and Mick Foley were the best ones, because the subjects are alive to talk about what took place and how their lives have changed since wrestling. And, it means a lot more for the subject to be alive, as far as I'm concerned, and I feel like it was fair. I think Vince was pretty fair. And I think that, when they talked about Montreal and that kind of stuff, man, I think, everybody's got their points. It is what it is. But let me know what you guys thought in the comment section below. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, donate to the channel if you please. And I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.